Welcome to the Everything EV podcast from EV Powered. I'm Matt Allan, and today we're bringing you a special episode looking at the UK government's recent changes to the zero emission vehicle mandate. This week, Prime Minister Keir Starmer announced a series of changes to the regulation that will allow hybrids to stay on sale for longer and increase flexibilities to help car makers avoid penalties for missing their EV sales obligations. To discuss these changes and their potential impact on the UK's EV landscape, I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Dan Caesar, founder of Fully Charged and CEO of Electrical Vehicles UK, and Quentin Willson, founder of Fair Charge and EV UK Advisory Board member. Thanks both for joining me. Dan, if I could maybe start with you. We've known these changes are coming for a while, ever since the government announced the consultation at the tail end of last year. But are these the sort of changes that you were expecting? Is this the route you thought the government was likely to go down?
Well, there's no smoke without fire, is there, Matt? So we were getting rumblings of this on the kind of the industry drums as late as sort of late last year. We were expecting, I think, what was going to happen. I think probably the main headline for us is that we knew there would be additional flexibilities added to the ZEV mandate. But the thing we were particularly concerned was that the phase out period from 2030 to 2035 was only intended for plug-in hybrid electric vehicles and battery electric vehicles. And we were most concerned that actually other types of hybrids would be allowed in. Those were the rumors, and that has now come to pass. We're still awaiting a little bit of the detail, Matt, but as I understand it, it will be what we know as HEVs, hybrid electric vehicles, and not MHEVs, mild hybrid electric vehicles, that are included in that 2030 to 2035 phase out. And some might accuse me of being an EV evangelist and a purist, but the reality is that hybrid technology is pretty old now, and we think plug-in hybrids is quite a big concession towards the automotive industry already. One that's probably necessary. Let's get people in the habit of plugging in. We feel that's a good idea, a natural next step if people aren't quite ready to make the move to full battery electric vehicle. Although Quentin and I would say, don't wait, don't hesitate, just go straight to battery electric vehicle. We understand the need for that to be included. But I guess the disappointing thing about the inclusion of other types of hybrids, ones that don't plug in, is the confusion that is already existing amongst consumers. This was a great opportunity to start again and make it easier. And we know that the industry wants more clarity, they want more certainty, they even want the ability to fund the demand side of this equation, to promote these technologies to consumers. But I'd argue if you include hybrids without a plug, that whole thing becomes much more complicated and much more expensive.
I mean, so do you think this is a bit of a backward step then? Is it almost an admission of defeat to sort of effectively, sort of, for all that they've said, the targets are still there for 80% by 2030 and 100% by 35. Is this a bit of a backward step, or do you think it's just a pragmatic approach to where the market is and to how it's perhaps changed since those targets were initially put in place?
I'm going to be full of positivity during this podcast, but what I
Good.
would say to begin with, I think it probably is a little bit of a backward step. There's plenty of reasons to be cheerful as well. I think not least, Great British consumers' uptake of new and used EVs is very, very good. But from speaking to industry sources behind the scenes who kind of dwell in the corridors of power yesterday, I think some of this was done on the hoof quickly to actually counter the Trump tariff story, which is obviously spooking financial markets, spooking automotive industry, etc. This was done quite quickly on the hoof as a way of kind of, I guess, helping the automotive industry. But it feels like a bit of a backward step. And because they haven't come forward and explained everything, it also feels like they've managed to have a little bit of a backward step and confuse things a little bit more. Now, I'm sure clarity is on its way. I remain positive, and there are plenty of good reasons for positivity. But as of today, we're a little bit disappointed, but probably not that surprised either.
Yeah, yeah. I think actually we'll come back to the Trump thing. I did want to discuss that a little later. But Quentin, from your point of view, do you think that this, obviously we're still waiting for the clarity, but do you think this is just an opportunity now for car makers to take their foot off the gas effectively and to just spend more time and money on hybrids Or do you think actually that enough of them have set their path towards the targets that they will just push on towards that and maybe just take advantage of those extra flexibilities?
I think it's right to support the domestic motor industry, unquestionably, and I think it was right to exempt those smaller manufacturers who can't hit these targets. But as Dan says, we know that this has been, a struggle for the UK automotive and government for months and months, might even be years. We've been hearing that, they want hybrids included. And we know that, your Toyota Prius, your 90s technology, it just doesn't work as well as a fully electric car. And it's complicated. It requires more servicing, more maintenance. The batteries don't last as long. And the difference between a combustion version and a small battery, small electric motor hybrid, it's marginal. And in terms of CO2 air quality, greenhouse gas, it's also marginal. So consumers, in a way, are being hoodwinked. I'm going to buy a hybrid. Whoa, great glow of warm approval. Well, actually, if you really knew the figures, you'd say, why am I bothering? And the plug-in hybrid, I think Dan's right as well, is good as long as it does about kind of 40 to 50 miles on one charge. And people don't just buy them for the benefit in kind, because we see lots of them coming back with the plugs, the leads still in their plastic wrappers. I drove a BMW i400 yesterday, and I only got 26 miles on a fully charged battery, which really isn't very good, and just that it's confusing, and so I think we should have plug-in hybrids, but standard hybrids should not have been included in this at all.
Yeah.
And it's a loophole. And I think also, Matt, the big word for me is that it allows them to carry on making combustion cars. It's as simple as that. And that's what they want. It's a loophole in the regulation. The flexibility is absolutely fine. We shouldn't be paying our domestic automotive shouldn't be paying BYD and Tesla for credits, and in reality, I don't think any car maker will be fined large amounts of money because the publicity would be awful. I mean, it's just it would be nuts. So they do that, and they sort of say, look, we're going to be fined millions. We're going to have to close factories and all this, and then Jonathan Reynolds says, "Oh, okay, don't worry," and then they've got this stuff over the line. So I think it was an ideal political opportunity for them to get what they wanted and what they've been asking for, and it didn't have a great deal to do with Trump's tariffs.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, you mentioned this buying credits off Polestar and BYD and people like that. And I think Keir Starmer said in a column in the Times that UK car makers shouldn't be paying foreign car makers for these things. And do you think actually now the changes have made it so that's not going to happen? Then they'll be able to use these flexibilities to get round any potential fines.
Yeah, and they'll be able to sort of bank their credits for the next year or the year after that. So there's so much flexibility, but it means that there's a danger that we'll be making fewer electric cars, not more. And while we do that, there is this Chinese dragon waiting in the wings, ready to come on stage and make our auto industry uncompetitive. And to me, and I think you'll agree with this, Dan, for them to be kind of still so steadfast and say, EVs are not the way forward that we want, and we still want combustion cars and hybrids, seems a bit kind of mad.
I think actually Dan and I were at an event last week or a couple of weeks ago where somebody pointed out that the Chinese government effectively 20 years ago said electric is the future, and it's been powering all the way down. I know it's a slightly different political situation, but they've been powering towards it ever since. And so they are just full pelt going for EVs. And as you say, this sort of trying to balance away between, oh, we're doing EVs, but we still want to do hybrids as well. That's actually, it's going to do harm rather than benefit them in the long term.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a clear direction of travel. Other countries are making it, particularly China, and it's clear that they're building their economy around it, and we need to react as well. And there's another thing that Trump didn't mention, that Starmer didn't mention yesterday, and that was the huge opportunities this presents for the UK, because all that disenfranchised American green capital that was set up for IRA and Biden, that's now restless and looking for somewhere to come. And we should be saying, whoa, we've got stable policies regarding electrification and EVs. Come here, build your factories here, and get Chinese factories onshored here as well. And look at the tremendous, and that's the good news story here, Dan. It really is this ability to be able to build your green industries, and already we're number one in Europe, and we can carry on not being number one in the world, but certainly chasing that Chinese dragon off the stage.
So actually, yeah, as you both mentioned, Trump there and the tariffs, and this was one of the things that came out. Sort of the announcement was that it was presented as, we're doing our best to protect British businesses from these new tariffs and things. Do you think it's actually about these Trump tariffs, or is it about wider global issues, or is it about the pressure that's been brought to bear on the government by car manufacturers who don't think they're going to hit the EV targets under the current structure?
I mean, I think the tariffs have come fast in one way. They were flagged up during the election. Trump's talked about it regularly. I think there was a sense that will he, won't he? Will he really go through with this? It seems like an extremely reckless policy. There's even talk now that you might pause it or pull back, and it might all be part of a negotiation tactic. I think that the UK was probably very happy to be a 10% list on the tariff as opposed to a higher amount. But there's no doubt about it. I mean, it's very, very tough for the automotive industry around the world at the moment, particularly the sort of legacy automakers that perhaps haven't moved quite quickly enough. And I think they've probably been in the government's ear quite a lot over the recent months. There's obviously been a consultation period that's closed relatively recently. And we know, for example, that the Secretary of State for Business, Jonathan Reynolds, was in Tokyo not that long ago, trying to figure out the way forward with Nissan and with Toyota. Perfectly logical thing to do. But while you're over there, I would suggest to look at what's going on in Shanghai and Shenzhen, Chongqing, and all over China would have been worth a look as well, because actually, where others have been content with you know, the hybrids, halfway house, what is it really? That technology's been around for a long, long time. And actually, if you go to China, you'll see that they're long, long way ahead. So I think really, perhaps being slightly cynical, maybe these tariffs provide a good cover to make this announcement. But I listened to the announcement. There wasn't a huge amount of substance to it yesterday, so it does feel like it was rushed, and that's certainly what I'm hearing. We're still waiting for some of the details. It's the poor guys at the DFT I feel sorry for, because I think they probably woke up on Monday morning and the world had changed for them, and they were having to just go with it, I think.
I think you're right. It is rushed. And if you read that op-ed that Starmer did in the Times, he described hybrids as a fantastic innovation. Now, that's from somebody who clearly doesn't understand what they're doing. I think he probably meant electric cars, but it kind of slipped through the net. Now, Number 10's policy unit, who will have been all over that article, don't see the difference either. I kind of worry. So we need ministers to be driving, using, handling, charging, owning these cars, and then they'll be part of the conversation. Because if you're on the periphery, you're an outlier. It's an abstract concept. And Starmer said he's not going to be ideological about EVs. Well, you need to understand them, first of all, before you've even got a view. And that's a big worry for me, that here we are, we've all done hundreds of thousands of miles in these cars, haven't we, Dan? And then multiple models, and we're at the coalface, the sharp end, the pointy end. We know that things work so well in service. And all we're trying to do is pass that knowledge and that experience on to consumers and say, it's okay to come out from underneath the duvet. EVs work in service. They're much cheaper than combustion cars to live with, to run. They're much cheaper to maintain. You'll save $1,000 on fuel. They're much more reliable, and they're absolutely wonderful to drive. It's a simple message, and we will tell you that there is no money in this. People say, well, you're making so much money at the EV industry. They're all paying you. Take it from me, take it from Dan. They're not. We do it because we think it's important for us to get this message across. Because if we don't, then it all crumbles and collapses.
Do you think that's sorry, Dan, when you go.
Well, it's probably fair to say that, if people wanted to dismiss Quentin and I as a couple of cranks who happen to have driven a long way in EVs, they'd be welcome to do so. But the reality is that we've driven a lot, but actually through things like the Fully Charged show that I work on, through things like the Everything Electric exhibitions that I run, through our friends like Ginny Buckley, for example, who runs that great electrifying.com channel, through Faircharge. We've been exposed to thousands upon EV drivers who almost every time you survey them, well over 9 out of 10 say we'll never go back to combustion engine technology. So that's a pretty strong testimony, I think, to the quality of these technologies. And yet, if you look at the MPs, and they've got a really tough job, by the way, but they don't have much time to fit in. But we would love to put them in EVs because there's so few of them who have actually even driven one. And it is a bit like, they're sort of sticking up for the kind of, the I guess the handheld, the sort of the Nokia phone, while there's these other things out there called iPhones that they've never tried and they don't understand. And obviously those new technologies are transformative. So from our perspective, yeah, we will do everything in our power to pass on the knowledge that we've learned through millions and millions and millions of hours of people watching YouTube and looking at these cars, from millions of hours of people doing test drives at our live events, loads of experience that's actually gone to improving the charging network, all that kind of feedback. And that knowledge is so powerful. But it has felt in the last few months that while DFT have been extremely helpful to us, we've really struggled to get our message beyond that into what I would call the cabinet or senior political circles. And that is frustrating because I would say there's a wealth of knowledge here to be tapped into if the government wanted to do so.
I sent a message to number 10 and said, look, we're here. We could give you so much experience, so much knowledge, so much cold face. Just talk to us off the record and we'll tell you how not to get your descriptions wrong and how to understand what is the reality and to separate, fact from myth and misunderstanding and downright nonsense, really.
Do you think that is still part of the problem, is that even those in senior government are still buying into this, all the sorts of nonsense that we've known for years is just myths and misinformation or information from 15 years ago, that they're still getting this in their ear and they're still not understanding what, as you say, we understand from people who use EVs every day. They're just not exposed to that, the actual information.
I think we forget we're in a bubble. The Westminster's in a bubble too. I mean, the fact that they don't drive and use public transport or ministerial cars, I think, is an issue. But they're not listening to the same voices we are, and that's absolutely fine. But they need to have advisors who are, and people who can tell them. And that's a role that at the moment I can't see is being fulfilled within government. As Dan says, DFT have been absolutely great, and they're really supportive, and they're trying very, very hard. But while the cabinet's got lots and lots of other pressures, it would be nice if they reached out and said, we want to understand more about this, more about the size of the market, more about the potential for growth, for industry, for all this, from people who have lived it. And that's it. We've got this campaign running on Faircharge called Ask an EV Driver. And I always say to people, well, I'm not sure about EVs, ask an EV driver, and they will tell you the unvarnished truth.
I mean, it's quite interesting. You just talk to anyone, and I would include MPs in this, not include journalists in this as well, and you have a good conversation with them, and actually, it is possible to really, without being patronizing, educate them and actually put them in a different position so that when they get asked, or if they write an article, let's say, they get it right next time. Just little things like the market's moved so fast, Matt. It's moved so fast. I understand why you might not be up to date. Like, I never look down on people who get it wrong, but if they get it wrong, you hope to have the opportunity to say, no, that's quite right. So, for example, at the moment, a few years ago, cobalt was a really one of those sort of big sort of totemic issues with people, and I still hear that now from the odd journalist and certainly politicians. And I would say, well, you do know now that LFP is actually the dominant chemistry in battery electric vehicles now. Over 7 out of 10 cars out of China are now got LFP in them, and actually probably that'll move to almost all of them in time, and that doesn't have any cobalt in at all. Really, comes the reply from 9 out of 10 people. And it's just, how could they keep up to date? It's very, very difficult. I mean, Quentin and I, we see a new story every day about how fast a battery charge is, or, go to visit a new charging hub, talk to EV drivers. So I do have some sympathy, but this kind of sort of holding your hands over your ears, ostriching and pretending experts don't exist is an unfortunate phenomenon of modern Britain is very frustrating because in every walk of life, there are people who just have lived it and understand it better. But I say MP's jobs are very, very tough. I do
Yeah.
understand.
Yeah. Like, if we could just very, very quickly touch on a couple of other, maybe slight more minor, not necessarily minor, but maybe not as well covered elements of the changes. Now, the two other things that sort of stood out to me were the fact that we're now getting small volume manufacturers are going to be exempt from the 2035 target, and also that they're almost, I don't know, it's possibly harsh to say they've abandoned the aim of phasing out diesel vans, but we're now going to have diesel vans without hybridization available until 2035. Um, do you think that was inevitable from do you think it was inevitable from the point of view of these tiny manufacturers aren't having a big impact on the net zero targets anyway? And with vans, obviously, we've heard a lot from fleet operators that they don't think electric vans are fit for purpose yet. So do you think that was a sort of an inevitable outcome as well?
Dan,
Quentin,
do you want to? I mean, let's be realistic about this. As you said right at the top, we're not evangelists, and we have to be pragmatic. And I think you're absolutely right, Matt, that the diesel van is not fit for purpose in terms of range, in terms of charging time, and it needs more development and also infrastructure. It's very difficult to use a passenger car charger for a diesel van. So I understand why. It's a great shame because there's so many of them out there, and they are very, very, very polluting. Certainly the old ones. So yeah, we get it, and that's a compromise. I think that if we're pragmatic about this, that was needed to be made, but not the hybrid thing. I think that was a step too far.
there'll be plenty of commercial vehicle experts that we know out there saying actually a lot of tradespeople, my dad was one, so I can talk to this with some authority, have a van and they use it very locally. Use it very, very locally, in which case actually electric van can be very, very good for that purpose. And actually, when you're looking at it as a business expense, can actually be very compelling when you actually get a spreadsheet out. But again, it plays to misinformation. I don't think we would have expected, any consultation to take place and for everything to go as we expected. But it does seem a little bit like the voice of the kind of EV industry is being less listened to, let's say, than the voice of the industry that the legacy industry. And of course, legacy industry has some vested interests in the perpetuation of hybrid technology, in which they've sunk a lot of money over many years. But the worry for me, Matt, is that as an industry in the UK, obviously want to protect jobs. I am 100% behind that whole idea. But what happens if, they've misjudged it and EVs do take off much, much quicker than they expect, which I believe will be the case, is that if, let's say, Nissan, a popular touchstone at the moment for talking about electric vehicles, who have struggled a little bit and obviously have a great, great history of making cars here in the UK for our own use and for export as well. What if they fall behind? What if they actually lose out? They're under tremendous pressure from the American tariff situation, by the way, as well. About half of the cars they sell in the US. What if they fell behind? What if they, struggled? What if they didn't make it through? And what if we hadn't maybe got other manufacturers into the country that are focused on the newer technologies, that being battery EVs? Or what if we hadn't encouraged Nissan to stay competitive, keep its muscles strong? That's the whole thing. I was listening to something that Stella Lee from BYD that they said the competition is good, makes you stronger. The idea of saying there's no competition will unfortunately increase complacency. So, to be clear, I want Nissan to survive and to thrive. I want all these companies to do well, but it seems to me that a few of them are a little bit behind the curve. And our car industry that we're trying to protect could, if we try and put our heads in the sand, just become a little bit smaller, or maybe a lot smaller, if we don't start to embrace battery electric vehicles here in the UK.
I don't want to take up too much more of your time. I'm aware that it's both very busy chats. Can we just finally, I want to talk about the consumer side of things. So obviously everything we've discussed so far, this is all about industry facing. This is about reacting to what the industry is asking for. But I think we're still not hearing anything from the government about what they're doing to help consumer demand. We keep hearing that car makers say people need to be encouraged to go EV, and as we've discussed, we all know we don't need convincing that EV is the right way to go, but there are a lot of people out there that still do. So do we still need more intervention from government or incentives or something like that to help boost the market, and then perhaps that helps the manufacturers just leap on with EVs rather than messing about with the sort of older tech like hybrids?
We saw a lot missing yesterday in the government speech about demand and creating it and encouraging consumers to change their behavior. There was nothing. And this is the great lament of the motor industry, that consumers aren't buying them quickly enough, and there isn't the demand, and they do need incentives. Now, I don't think we should be spending taxpayer money propping up car companies. Really don't. But there are lots of levers government could have pulled, and hopefully they will soon. And it's like cutting the VAT on public charging. My hobby horse that I've been riding for years and years and years with the Treasury. The expensive car supplement, which means that if your EV costs over £40,000, you'll be paying a total of £620 every year for your road tax, which is as much as some Range Rovers. Things like free parking or interest-free loans for charge boxes, reform of the electricity market, that'll take some time. Decoupling gas from electricity prices, again, that'll take some time. But lots of simple levers that they could be pulling that aren't going to cost a huge amount of money. I mean, the 5p Sunak cut in 2020 on fuel duty has cost 2 billion. So when I say let's cut the VAT on public charging, and this is what it's going to cost, between 80 and 90 million, it's not a great deal of money. So consumers, private drivers, don't have any reason to change their behavior. Fleet drivers do. They get the benefit in kind and the tax breaks. But we've got to start incentivizing those people. And Dan and I have talked, and we've talked to the DfT about this, about an independent nationwide campaign to stress the financial benefits of driving an EV, and not a government campaign, but done by somebody who can just, capture those voices from the 1.4 million people who do drive EVs. And that's the sort of thing that we need to kind of change behavior and be a counterpoint to all the stuff they have been reading. Not so much now, because we've tried to limit it, but they have been reading for, let's face it, a good couple of years in every publication going and every news channel about how bad EVs are and what a dead end street they are. So these are the things that are missing and should be done now by government, to say, look, it's okay to drive EVs. Here's the information. We're going to cut this, and this, and it shouldn't cost a lot of money to government. But it's really important that they pull these. And we go back to this idea that, unless they know where the touch points are, they won't be able to enact the policies. So this is where we constantly talk to government about this. And to be fair, they have been quite receptive, DfT anyway.
I mean, this piece is absolutely a critical piece in the puzzle now. A few years ago, it was actually a little bit harder to make the case for EVs, but now there's an incredible range of them. They have incredible range. Charging is much better than people would have you believe, and also obviously most people charge at home or near to home. The actual route charging thing is actually quite a small percentage. There's a huge number of advantages that we've collected, and actually new EV sales are pretty good, 69,000 or thereabouts, and last month was a record month. We also have huge burgeoning used EV sales markets, and now's the time to put our foot down on the accelerator, the faster accelerator in this case, and actually start to message and drive demand. That's where I live now, Matt. I have to say, we're trying to drive demand on YouTube. Next week, depending on when this podcast goes out on the 16th, 17th, 18th, we'll run about 8,000 test drives of EVs at XL for Everything Electric London. Test drives are really important to this, really important to this, because getting out of a combustion car into your first electric car, it's not a huge leap. It's smaller than people think, but people need that kind of reassurance. And once they get in them, the cars sort of speak for themselves. And Electric Vehicles UK, the organisation that we've formed, that Quentin and I are working closely together on with Ginny Buckley and others from across the industry, the whole rationale of that organisation is to drive demand. We don't actually think it's realistic to expect the government in the current economic circumstances to actually come up with a huge amount of money to do this.
No.
Neither do we think it's fair for the taxpayer to take that burden. But also, if Keir Starmer thinks, for example, hybrids are a fantastic innovation, he might be of the belief that a huge TV campaign like TV is the way forward. The reality is marketing has changed as well. Of those, 1.5 million or so EV drivers in the UK, that's only a small percentage of the 35 million car park in the UK. We need to approach it. Who's going to buy a car in the next month, in the next 3 months, in the next 12 months, even in the next 2 years, and bring those people forward? We can bring people forward who haven't even considered one. We just need to bring them forward. And that requires a lot of digital marketing, knowing where those people are. They're watching YouTube, actually. They're not watching ITV, for example. They're on LinkedIn rather than on Facebook, for example. We know where these people are. And so any marketing campaign, any driving demand campaign doesn't need to spend a fortune on this kind of huge blunderbuss scattergun marketing that we would have had done in the past. We can actually do this much more effectively, much more cost effectively. So Electric Vehicles UK announces its prospectus soon, which is all about driving demand. And there are, for my mind, a whole range of things that we can get distracted by. Fake stories of Luton car park going up in flames, for example. But what we really need to do is reinforce the two key messages over and over again: cheaper, better, battery electric. That's the mantra you're going to hear from Electric Vehicles UK. Cheaper, better, battery electric. And those things can be proven out. We've recently done a cost of driving electric report, which showed that actually per car you can save about £5,850 on average by moving to an EV per car. So if you've got more than one car, you could be quids in potentially. Equally, used EVs are on average £2,871 cheaper than a combustion alternative. While it's boring and repetitive, we just need to keep repeating this as a mantra, keep these statistics up to date, show these proof points. And equally, when it comes to saying EVs are better, it's not my voice that matters in that respect. It's not Quentin's, it's the EV drivers. And as we know, regularly surveyed, more than 9 out of 10 of them will never go back. There's a good reason for that. So cheaper, better, battery electric is the thing you're going to be hearing at Electric Vehicles UK. Work across the industry, myself, Quentin, Ginny Buckley, and many others are going to come together to make that happen. And I think we can make a difference. After all, the cars are great.
And also, people need to understand that the change is so fast now. I mean, in the last fortnight, what do we have? We had the Instavolt Park in Winchester, 44 super fast chargers. So we've now got super hubs in the UK. We've got Brighton and Hove Council with 6,000 lamppost chargers, the biggest deployment of lamppost chargers. This was last week with Charge-E. And then we had Mercedes with their CLA, which does 459 miles to one charge. And they had a solid state battery running around in a prototype, which was getting 695. So this kind of like breathless wind of change that's happening, it is speeding up. And there are manufacturers who are pushing this. And if we don't really pursue this, then that innovation, that R&D, that swiftness will be lost. And that's why this imperative of the Z mandate and political will and just this industrial pressure is what we need to keep up, not to lessen.
Do you think it's as much about the message and about just getting that across to people as about anything else, about incentives or anything? It's about just driving home the positive message.
We know this stuff, but as Dan says, I mean, 32 million people don't. And it sounds like a Herculean task to get that message across, but it's not just cheaper, better, but it's also cheaper, better, faster, smoother. There's a myriad of things that all electric battery cars do better than diesel and petrol. I mean, massive. And as Dan says, once you're in one, 95% of people say they would never ever go back to combustion, and that's repeated all over the world. So.
Our philosophy really is, I've heard this said by someone else, so I can't remember who said it, so apologies if they listen to this, but I think the average consumer is hesitant, not hostile. And if you can make the case, and I think cost is the quickest thing to do it, then you can get a lot of people to come and have a look. And if we can get people into test drives, as we're going to doing en masse next week, for example, we can convert a lot of people, change a lot of minds. And there will come a point at which I will rejoice and crack open a non-alcoholic drink or something similar, when the network effect will kick in, when there'll be so many of these cars driving around that actually it will inspire other people. I live in the southeast of England, and I can say in London and the southeast of England, there are a lot of EVs. Sadly, that's not replicated right the way across the country. But in the southeast, I can see it already happening. I get asked about it very, very frequently. It's not happening quite as much elsewhere, which is a shame. It will in time. And I would also say we're not telling people that they need to do this. If they want to drive, a hybrid car, for example, they can buy one at the end of 2034 and run it for 15 years. It's not, people don't have to do it. But I would say that why not give it a go? Why not be open-minded, give it a chance? Because generally speaking, most people, once they actually try it, quite quickly converted to the cause.
And this idea that you'll never be allowed to drive a diesel or petrol car, which was Auto Trader said 70% of people believed this, didn't they? That they wouldn't. It was a ban that affected second-hand cars as well. You could drive your petrol and diesel car, and this is an important point to get across, forever. As long as there is fuel to power it, you can carry on blissfully driving that forever. You don't need ever to buy an electric car. But for those who are, as Dan says, curious, we're here to say that they work.
Well, I think that's a really positive note to end it on. Actually, that's we know how good they are. We need to keep helping other people understand that as well. So Dan and Quentin, thank you both really much for joining us.
Pleasure.
Much appreciated.
You can find more episodes of the Everything EV podcast on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.